It was just another shift at Domino's where the pizzas weren't the only things being cooked. My patience was too. My name's Nate, and I'd been working there for a year, juggling night classes while picking up shifts to make some extra cash. Deliveries were my bread and butter. The tips weren't great, but they kept gas in my car and food in my fridge. That night, my manager, Rick, was on edge. He always got jumpy when the late shift rolled around, especially in this part of town. "Nate, I need you to cover the overnight deliveries." "Jimmy bailed again," Rick said, leaning on the counter. "Rick, come on, I've been here since noon." "I have a paper due tomorrow," I protested. "I'll throw in an extra $50, he offered, his tone making it clear I didn't have much of a choice. "Fine," I grumbled, "but just this once." By midnight, I was on my last delivery of the night. The address was in an old neighborhood I didn't recognize, tucked away on the outskirts of town. It was a single pizza, pepperoni with extra cheese. The customer had requested cash payment, which always made me uneasy. But Rick didn't care about that. As long as the money came in, my safety wasn't his problem. I pulled up to the house and felt uneasy right away. It looked like something out of a horror movie, peeling paint, grimy windows, and an overgrown yard tangled with weeds. The porch light flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows over the warped wooden steps. "Just drop it off and get out," I muttered to myself, grabbing the pizza bag and heading to the door. I rang the doorbell and waited. Nothing. I rang it again, glancing back at my car, half tempted to leave the pizza on the porch and bolt. Just as I was about to turn away, the door creaked open. A man stood in the shadows. "Domino's," I said, forcing a smile. "That'll be $15,999. The man stepped forward, and I finally got a good look at him. Late 30s, maybe early 40s, gaunt face, hollow eyes that seemed to see straight through me. He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile that made your stomach twist. "Come inside," he said, his voice low and gravelly. I hesitated. No thanks. You can just pay me here." He tilted his head, still smiling. I left my wallet in the kitchen. "Come in, and I'll grab it." Every instinct screamed at me to run. But I knew if I went back to the store without the money, Rick would blow a gasket. "All right," I muttered, stepping cautiously inside. "But make it quick." The air inside was stale, carrying the faint scent of something rotten. The living room was cluttered with old furniture and stacks of yellowed newspapers. Dim lighting cast long, suffocating shadows. "Wait here," the man said, disappearing into another room. I stood by the doorway, gripping the pizza bag like a shield. My eyes wandered, taking in the dusty shelves and faded photographs on the walls. One picture caught my attention, a man tied to a chair. His face was obscured, but his posture was unmistakable. Agony. My breath hitched. Was this some kind of sick joke? A sudden noise behind me made me jump. I spun around. The man was standing there, grinning from ear to ear. His hands were empty. "Where's the money?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. His smile widened. "Change of plans." My blood ran cold. "Why don't you stay for dinner?" Before I could react, something hard slammed into the back of my head. Everything went black. When I came to, I was sitting in a chair, my arms and legs bound tightly. The room was darker now, lit only by the flickering glow of a single bulb swinging from the ceiling. The man stood by a table, his back to me, humming a tuneless melody as he worked on something. "Let me go," I shouted, my voice hoarse. He turned slowly, holding a large kitchen knife in one hand. The smile was gone, replaced by something worse. Cold, calculated malice. "You shouldn't have come inside," he said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. I looked down and froze. My left hand was missing. Blood dripped onto the floor, pooling around the legs of the chair. The pain hadn't fully registered yet, but the sight alone made my stomach lurch. "Please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "I just want to go home." He laughed, low guttural sound that sent ice through my veins. "You are home now." I don't know how long I sat there, the agony in my hand becoming unbearable. The man moved around the room, still humming that eerie tune. At some point, I blacked out again. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor. The room was silent. The man was gone. My legs were free, but I could barely move. The pain was overwhelming, and I knew I was losing a lot of blood. Summoning every ounce of strength I had, I crawled toward the door. Each movement sent fresh waves of pain through me, but the thought of staying in that house was worse. I managed to get outside, collapsing on the porch steps as the cold night air hit me. Tiliao. Last thing I remember was the sound of sirens in the distance. Someone had called for help, but I never found out who. To this day, I can't deliver pizzas without feeling a knot of dread in my stomach. The man was never caught, and I still have nightmares about his face. That twisted smile haunts me every time I close my eyes. If you're ever delivering late at night, remember this. No job is worth your life. I still remember the year I worked at Domino's Pizza like it was yesterday. It was a small shop tucked into the corner of a busy strip mall in Columbus, Ohio. For the most part, it was a decent job. The late-night shifts weren't for everyone, but I didn't mind them. I enjoyed the relative calm after the dinner rush, the low hum of the kitchen equipment and the quiet moments in between taking orders and prepping pizzas. But there was one stretch of time that completely changed how I felt about working there. It wasn't the long hours, difficult customers, or even the occasional rowdy delivery drivers. No, it was because of the phone calls. Calls that started as a mild annoyance but quickly turned into something much worse. It was a Tuesday night in late October. Business was steady as usual, the phone ringing constantly as people placed their late-night orders. I was handling the Yao phones that night, taking orders and entering them into the system. It was around 10:15 p.m. when the phone rang again. Domino's Pizza, this is Alex, how can I help you? At first, there was nothing. Hello? I said again, glancing at the caller ID. It was a blocked number, which wasn't unusual. Plenty of customers called from private lines. Still, silence. Hello? Anyone there? I asked one last time, growing slightly annoyed. Then I heard it, a laugh. But it wasn't just any laugh. It was deep, raspy, and slow, the kind of sound you'd expect in a horror movie. It caught me off guard, and for a moment I just stood there, the phone pressed to my ear. Hello? I tried again, my voice unsteady. The laugh grew louder, more deliberate. A chill ran up my spine, and without thinking, I hung up. Who was that? My coworker Sarah asked as she walked by, carrying a tray of pizza boxes. No idea, I said, trying to play it off. Probably just some weirdo. She shrugged and went back to her station, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling settling in my chest. Over the next few days, the calls became more frequent. At first, it was just the same creepy laugh, but then the caller started whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unsettling, like they were taunting me. One night, I decided to keep them on the line longer. Who is this? I demanded once the laughter subsided. Silence. Look, I don't know what your deal is, but you need to stop calling, I said, trying to sound firm. More laughter. Then finally a response. I see you. I froze, my grip tightening around the receiver. What the hell does that mean? I asked, my voice trembling. But the caller hung up, leaving me staring at the phone in disbelief. I told Kevin, my manager, about the calls, but he just laughed. Probably just some bored teenager, he said. Sarah, on the other hand, was more concerned. You should start recording these calls or something, she suggested. What if it's someone messing with you specifically? I nodded, but deep down I didn't want to believe it was personal. A week later, I was home after a long shift. It was around 11:30 p.m., and I was just about to go to bed when my phone rang. I frowned at the unknown number on the screen. I hesitated before answering. Hello? Silence. Then, that same raspy laugh. My heart pounded. How the hell did you get my number? I demanded. The laughter grew louder, almost hysterical. Who are you? I shouted. What do you want? No response, just more laughter. Then after a long pause, the caller whispered, I know where you are. I hung up and immediately called Sarah. You need to come over, I said, my voice shaking. What's going on? She asked. It's the same person. They called me. Here. They know where I live." Sarah didn't ask any more questions. She showed up 20 minutes later, and we stayed up all night trying to figure out who could be behind the calls. But no matter how much we theorized, nothing made sense. The next week was hell. The calls at work continued, and now they were happening at home too. The whispers became clearer but no less disturbing. "I'm watching you," the caller would say. "Check your window," they whispered another time. Each time I felt a mix of anger and fear. I started keeping the blinds shut and double-checking the locks on my doors and windows. One night at work, the caller said something that sent a chill through me. "The back door looks unlocked tonight." I froze. I turned to Sarah, who was stacking boxes near the counter. "Did you check the back door?" I asked, trying to sound calm. She shook her head. "No. Why?" I didn't answer. Instead, I grabbed a flashlight and walked to the back of the store. The door was locked, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching us. It was a Wednesday night when I got the last call. I was alone at home, lying on the couch, trying to unwinding after another stressful shift. I was lying on the couch when my phone rang. I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" This time the laughter was louder than ever, high-pitched and hysterical. "Oh," like the person on the other end was spiraling into madness. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The laughter stopped abruptly. Then, in a low, guttural voice, the caller said, "Goodbye, Alex." A blood-curdling scream erupted from the other end of the line before the call disconnected. I stared at my phone, my hands trembling. That night I didn't sleep. Sarah came over again to keep me company, but after that the calls stopped completely. A few weeks later I quit my job at Domino's. I couldn't handle the stress of constantly wondering if the caller would return. To this day, I still don't know who it was or why they targeted me. Maybe it was just some twisted prank, or maybe it was something worse. All I know is that every time my phone rings late at night, I hesitate before answering. And sometimes, when I'm alone, I can still hear that laughter in my head. It still gives me chills. It was a cold October night, the kind that seemed to seep deep into your bones. The town of Riverview, where I had spent my entire life, was unusually quiet, almost unnervingly so. I worked at a small Domino's Pizza on the edge of town, a modest place with a flickering neon sign that seemed to struggle to stay lit. The store was busiest between 6 and 9 p.m., when families came in for dinner and late-shift workers grabbed a quick bite. By 9:30 p.m., things started to wind down. Inside, the warmth from the ovens mixed with the faint scent of melted cheese and garlic, while outside the streets remained eerily empty. My name's Jason. I'm 22, and this Domino's gig wasn't exactly my dream job, but it covered the basics: gas for my car and enough Wi-Fi to keep me connected. That night I worked the evening shift alongside Mia, my coworker and good friend. She was 24, tough as nails with a dry sense of humor that made even the worst customers bearable. "Hey, Jason," Mia called from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "Last call for orders. Want to bet we get a late-night weirdo?" I laughed and leaned on the counter. "We always do. You could set your watch by it." Mia snorted and disappeared into the back to start cleaning up. I stayed up front organizing the register while glancing at the clock. 9:32 p.m. Just 28 minutes left. The soft chime of the doorbell startled me. I looked up, expecting a last-minute customer, but the front of the store was empty. I stepped out from behind the counter and peered through the glass doors. The streetlights outside cast long shadows across the pavement, but no one was there. "Probably the wind," I muttered, shaking my head and turned to head back inside, but the door creaked open behind me. I whipped around, startled to see a man standing in the doorway. He was tall and thin, his long black coat hanging loosely from his bony shoulders. His pale face was unnervingly smooth, almost as if it had been sanded down, and his deep-set eyes looked like bottomless pits. "Good evening," I greeted, forcing a smile. "What can I get for you?" He didn't respond right away. His eyes scanned the store before finally focusing on me. "I'd like a large pizza," he said in a low, gravelly voice. Mushrooms and bell peppers. Nothing else. Sure thing, I replied, pulling out my notepad. He paused, his thin lips curling into a faint smile. Cut it into equilateral triangles, he added, his voice even colder. 13 centimeters on each side. Exactly. I blinked, caught off guard by the strange request. Sure, we can do that. He nodded slowly, stepping back to lean against the wall. I turned and retreated to the kitchen. Mia, I called, stepping into the back. Yeah? She replied, not looking up from the pan she was scrubbing. We've got a guy out front who wants his pizza cut into 13 centimeter triangles. She stopped scrubbing and raised an eyebrow. 13 centimeters? What the hell kind of request is that? I shrugged. No idea. He's a bit odd. Odd how? Just odd. You'd have to see him to understand, Mia rolled her eyes. Well, good luck with that. I'm not going out there. I chuckled nervously and got to work. The dough was stretched, the sauce spread, and I carefully layered the mushrooms and bell peppers. But as I measured the pizza and sliced each piece precisely, an unsettling chill crept up my spine. I glanced up at the wall in front of me and froze. The man's shadow was cast against the wall, but something was off, twisted like his limbs were bending in unnatural ways. I blinked, and the shadow returned to normal. Shaking off the feeling, I carried the boxed pizza to the counter. With a forced smile, I handed it to the man. Here you go. 1 large pizza, sliced exactly as requested. He took the box with his long, bony fingers. His fingers brushed against mine, and I recoiled slightly. His skin felt cold and unnatural, almost rubbery. Perfect, he said, his lips curling into a grin. I couldn't help but notice his teeth, sharp, jagged, and yellowed. He reached into his coat and pulled out a handful of coins and crumpled bills, placing them into my hand. Thank you, I muttered, my voice trembling. He turned and walked out, the doorbell chiming softly as he left. Jason, why are you just standing there? Mia's voice snapped me out of my daze. I turned to her, holding up the money. That guy, did you see him? He just bought a pizza. Mia frowned. What guy? No one's been here for the past hour. Confused, I stared at her. What are you talking about? He was just here. Mia's expression shifted from confusion to concern. Jason, the store's empty. I looked down at the money in my hand and nearly dropped it. It wasn't money at all. It was a handful of damp soil crawling with insects. Mia screamed, stepping back as the bugs spilled onto the counter. I hurriedly threw the soil onto the floor, my stomach churning as centipedes and beetles scurried in every direction. We need to check the cameras, I said, my voice shaking. Mia nodded and we rushed to the back office. The footage was grainy but clear enough. I watched myself standing at the counter holding a pizza box and talking animatedly to thin air. There was no man. The next morning I reported the incident to the police. They didn't believe me, of course, but they sent an officer to investigate. The only clue they found was a trail of dirty footprints outside the store, leading to a nearby alley. The eerie part? The distance between each step was exactly 13 centimeters. 2 months later, I was scrolling through the news when a headline caught my eye. Unsolved case of missing construction worker finally closed. The article detailed the murder of a worker who had been pushed into a concrete mixer 5 years ago. His body was buried beneath the foundation of a Domino's pizza in Riverview. The article included a photo of the victim. My heart stopped. It was him. I still remember the summer 6 years ago when everything changed. Back then, I was a college student home for summer break in Atlanta, Georgia, trying to make some extra cash. Like most students, I needed a job that wouldn't interfere too much with my social life, and delivering pizzas for Domino's seemed like the perfect fit. It wasn't glamorous, but the tips were good, and the late-night hours suited me. My mom, however, was always worried. "Chris, you're driving around at all hours in this city," she'd say every time I put on my uniform. "It's not safe, especially in those rougher neighborhoods." "Mom," I'd reply with a reassuring grin, "it's just pizza delivery. I'm not working for the mob. She never found it funny, but I figured she was just being overprotective. After all, I'd never had any real trouble. Sure, there were drunk customers, awkward encounters, and the occasional rude jerk who didn't tip, but nothing truly dangerous, until one Friday night. It was late July, one of those muggy summer nights where the heat lingers long after sunset. Fridays were always hectic at Domino's, and this one was no different. From 6 p.m. to midnight, it was non-stop orders. By the time the rush finally started dying down, I was exhausted. I was wiping down the counter when my manager, Mike, called me over. "Hey, Chris," he said, holding up a receipt. "One last delivery for the night." I sighed, already halfway out the door mentally. "Where to?" Mike glanced at the address. Some warehouse on the industrial side, cheese, pizza, and garlic bread, easy drop-off. Warehouse? I frowned. That's not exactly a normal delivery spot. Yeah, it's weird, but people work late shifts there sometimes. They probably just want a snack. He handed me the order slip. "It's your last one. Knock it out and you're done for the night." I hesitated for a moment. The industrial district wasn't my favorite place to drive, especially at night. It was full of dimly lit streets, abandoned buildings, and a general air of desolation. But I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I nodded, grabbed the food, and headed to my car. As I left the more populated parts of the city, the roads grew eerily quiet. Streetlights became fewer and farther between, and the buildings loomed taller and more industrial. The GPS guided me down a series of winding streets until I reached the address. The building was a gray, 2-story warehouse surrounded by a chain-link fence. The instructions on the order read, "Deliver to the back door, enter through the alley." Stared at the alleyway for a moment. It was pitch black except for the faint glow of a flickering streetlight near the entrance. I thought about calling the customer to let them know I was there, but the number on the receipt wasn't local. That was odd, but not unheard of. Shaking off the unease, I parked, grabbed the pizza bag, and started toward the alley. It was narrow, flanked by the warehouse on one side and a row of dumpsters on the other. My footsteps echoed off the brick walls, unnervingly loud in the stillness. The air smelled of oil and rotting garbage, and a faint buzzing came from the streetlight behind me. When I reached the back door, I knocked lightly and called out, "Domino's delivery." Nothing. I knocked again, louder this time. "Hello? Your pizza's here." Still no response. I glanced around, suddenly hyper-aware of how alone I was. The alley was completely deserted. The only sounds were the faint hum of the streetlight and the distant rumble of a passing train. Just as I was about to knock a third time, I heard a noise behind me, a faint rustling. Something shifted near the dumpsters. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. Slowly, I turned around. A man stepped out from behind one of the dumpsters, his face partially hidden by a baseball cap and sunglasses. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark hoodie despite the summer heat. Hey," I said cautiously, holding up the pizza bag. "Is this your order?" He didn't answer. Instead, he started walking toward me, his movements slow and deliberate. My stomach tightened. "If this isn't yours, I can just leave it here," I added, trying to keep my voice steady. Still nothing. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw another figure emerge from the shadows on the opposite side of the alley. He was shorter, but just as unsettling, his face obscured by a hoodie and sunglasses. "Look," I said, my voice trembling now. "If this is some kind of joke, it's not funny." Neither of them spoke. They just kept coming, their footsteps echoing ominously in the narrow alley. My fight-or-flight instincts kicked in. Clutching the pizza bag like some kind of shield, I started backing away. "Seriously, guys, I don't want any trouble. Just take the food and leave me alone." But they weren't interested in the food. They were interested in me. Realizing I had no choice, I turned and bolted. "Hey," one of them shouted, his voice sharp and angry. I didn't look back. My heart pounded in my chest as I sprinted down the alley, their footsteps close behind me. The bag of food swung wildly in my hand, but I didn't dare stop to drop it. Reaching the street, I ran straight into the road, waving my arms frantically as a car approached. The driver slammed on the brakes, tires screeching as the vehicle skidded to a halt just inches from me. "What the hell, man?" the driver yelled, leaning out the window. "Help me!" I shouted, my voice cracking with panic. His eyes flicked to the alley behind me, and his expression changed instantly. "Get in," he barked, unlocking the passenger door. I didn't need to be told twice. I yanked the door open, jumped in, and he hit the gas, speeding away. The driver, a middle-aged man with a gruff demeanor, glanced at me as we tore down the road. What the hell was that about? I don't know, I admitted, my voice shaky. I was just delivering a pizza and they came out of nowhere. He didn't ask any more questions. He dropped me off at a nearby gas station where I called my manager and the police. When the cops arrived, I explained everything. They went to check the warehouse, but by the time they got there, the men were gone. The building was abandoned and the order had been placed using a fake phone number. The officer taking my statement didn't mince words. "You're lucky you got out of there," he said grimly. "People have gone missing in that area." Quit my job the next day. The thought of going back out there, especially at night, was too much. To this day, I don't know what those men wanted. Maybe it was just a robbery, or maybe it was something worse. Whatever their intentions, I'm grateful I trusted my instincts and ran. Sometimes a simple pizza delivery can turn into something far more sinister. It was late October, and the weather had just started to change. The crisp air made staying in feel like the best option, and I was more than happy to spend my Friday night at my girlfriend Claire's apartment. We were sprawled out on her worn-out couch, scrolling through streaming apps trying to settle on a movie. She wanted a romantic comedy while I was pushing for a thriller. "How about this? We order food and whoever pays gets to pick the movie," Claire suggested with a smirk. "Fine," I said, grabbing my phone. "But you better be ready for some edge-of-your-seat suspense." We went with Domino's, classic for a lazy night. I ordered a pepperoni pizza and some pasta, my go-to comfort food. When the notification popped up that the order was ready, I volunteered to pick it up. The Domino's was only 5 minutes away, and honestly, I didn't mind the drive. It beat paying extra for delivery and tipping on top of that. I grabbed my jacket and keys. "Be back in 10, I called out as I left. The streets were quiet as I drove through the suburban neighborhood, the glow of streetlights reflecting off the damp asphalt. The Domino's was tucked in a small strip mall between a laundromat and a liquor store. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few scattered cars. I parked close to the entrance and walked in. The smell of pizza hit me immediately, warm, cheesy, and inviting. The lobby was empty except for me, and the place had that eerie late-night quiet, broken only by the occasional hum of the soda machine. A woman in a Domino's uniform, probably in her late 20s, appeared from the back. She looked tired but managed a brief smile. "Be right with you," she said before disappearing again. "No problem," I replied, leaning on the counter. I glanced around the small space, taking in the tired plastic chairs and faded posters of pizza deals. Just as I was about to check my phone, an odd sensation crept over me, like I was being watched. Turning around, I looked out the large front window. Man was standing outside. His face was pressed against the glass, eyes locked onto me, unblinking. He had a scruffy beard, stringy hair, and an unsettling expression, a mix of anger and something else I couldn't quite place. My chest tightened. He didn't look like an employee or a fellow customer. I turned back to the counter, shaking, off the unease. Maybe he was just a weirdo passing by, but I couldn't help myself. I glanced over my shoulder again. He was still there, his face uncomfortably close to the glass. Just then, the Domino's employee returned. She looked up, her expression shifting to one of nervous confusion when she noticed him. "Do you know him?" she asked quietly. "No," I said, keeping my voice low. "He's been out there since I walked in." She gave a nervous laugh like she was trying to brush it off, but her eyes betrayed her discomfort. She grabbed my order, a pizza, ox and a bag of pasta, and handed it to me. "Thanks," I muttered, trying to sound normal. I glanced toward the window one last time as I stepped outside. The man was gone. I let out a small breath of relief as I walked toward my car, but it was short-lived. When I rounded the corner to the parking lot, my stomach dropped. The same man was now standing by my car, leaning against the driver's side door. His hands were shoved into the pockets of his ratty jacket, and he was grinning at me. I hesitated, my feet frozen. I wasn't sure what to do. He didn't say anything, didn't move, just stood there watching me. "Hey," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can I help you?" He didn't answer. The grin stayed plastered on his face. I tightened my grip on the pizza box and forced myself to keep walking, my heart pounding, with every step. As I got closer, he finally spoke. "Nice night, isn't it?" His voice was low and gravelly. I didn't respond, just nodded and muttered, "Good night," as I unlocked my car. He didn't move as I climbed into the driver's seat and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I turned the key in the ignition. As I pulled out of the lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was still standing there, still grinning. The drive back to Claire's place felt much longer than it should have. I was hyper-aware of every car behind me, every shadow on the side of the road. But just as I started to relax, something felt off. The steering wheel jerked slightly and the car began to wobble. My heart pounded as I pulled onto the shoulder. Stepping out to check, my stomach dropped. The lug nuts on my front right tire were nearly off. The wheel was barely hanging on. Panic surged through me. Had he done this? My head snapped up, scanning the dark road around me. I grabbed my phone and called Claire. "Hey, are you okay?" She answered immediately. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "Something's wrong with my car. Can you come get me?" She promised to be there in minutes. I got back inside, locked the doors, and waited, my eyes flicking to the mirrors, half expecting to see that man's face in the darkness. Claire arrived quickly, and we drove to her place to grab a wrench to fix the tire. We were gone maybe 10 minutes. But when we returned, my heart stopped. The driver's side window was smashed. Shards of glass littered the seat. A sick feeling churned in my stomach. I had barely been gone, and yet, whoever did this had been close. Too close. We called the police and waited in the cold night air. Even with Claire beside me, I felt exposed, vulnerable, like he was still out there watching. When the officers arrived, I explained everything. The strange man, how he lingered by my car, the tampered wheel. They inspected the damage and took fingerprints, but with the darkness and rain, there wasn't much to go on. "It seems like this guy was following you," one officer said. "You did the right thing calling us. If this ever happens again, go somewhere safe and call immediately." I nodded, but my mind was racing. The next day, after filing a report and getting my car fixed, Claire and I tried to shake off the unease. As time passed, things started to feel normal again. A few days later, we planned another movie night. Hoping to push the fear aside, we ordered food again, this time from a different place. Before leaving, I double-checked the locks on my car. The drive was uneventful. But as I pulled into Claire's apartment parking lot, my breath caught in my throat. Sitting on the hood of her car was the same man. His grin, just as unsettling as before. This time, there was no mistaking it. He was watching me. My hands fumbled for my phone, but before I could react, he slowly raised a hand and waved. His eyes never left mine. I blinked, and he was gone, like he had melted into the shadows. Claire rushed outside when she heard my car door slam. "What's wrong?" she asked, her face shifting when she saw the panic in mine. "He's here," I whispered. "That man, he's not done." We called the police again, but by the time they arrived, he had vanished. The officers reassured us, but nothing could shake the gnawing fear inside me. That night, I barely slept, my thoughts consumed by a chilling realization. No matter where I went, he could find me.